Every avoidant relationship reaches a breaking point where distance replaces intimacy, and this truth unfolds slowly, almost invisibly at first. In the beginning, distance can feel alluring. The person who seems hard to reach, who guards their heart so carefully, often carries an air of mystery that draws you in. Their independence can feel refreshing, their restraint can feel like confidence, and their silence can even be mistaken for depth. But as time passes, the very qualities that first pulled you closer become the very walls that keep you locked out. What once felt like intrigue begins to feel like neglect, and what once felt like strength begins to feel like avoidance. The warmth you crave is no longer there, replaced by coldness and uncertainty, and suddenly the relationship begins to feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. This breaking point does not happen overnight. It comes in small moments that pile up, in conversations where you notice you're the only one truly opening up, in arguments that never resolve because one person withdraws instead of engaging. It comes in the subtle ways you learn to tiptoe around their moods, holding back your own feelings because you fear being labeled as too needy or too much. It comes in the nights when you sit next to them yet feel completely alone, when their body may be close but their heart feels miles away. Slowly, the distance ceases to feel like a choice you're making together and instead becomes a prison you're trapped in. You are loving someone who has already mastered the art of retreat, someone who feels safest when love is kept at arm's length. When this pattern persists, intimacy begins to dissolve. Real intimacy demands vulnerability, the willingness to be known, and the courage to let someone else in. But with an avoidant partner, the moment the relationship deepens, their instinct is to pull away. They find safety in retreat, in creating space, in putting walls between themselves and the risk of true closeness. To them, distance feels like control, but to you, it feels like abandonment. And the more they retreat, the more you chase, hoping to bridge the gap, hoping to remind them that love does not have to mean losing freedom. But your chasing only makes them withdraw further, creating a cycle of pursuit and retreat that erodes the foundation of the bond. The breaking point comes when the realization finally sets in. The relationship is no longer a place where you can be fully yourself. You have bent so much that you barely recognize your own reflection. You silence your needs so they won't feel pressured. You downplay your feelings so they won't shut down. You celebrate tiny gestures of attention as though they are proof of devotion, all while ignoring the larger absence of consistency and care. The intimacy you long for has been replaced by constant calculation, a balancing act between expressing too much and saying too little. You no longer feel secure. Instead, you feel like you're on probation, waiting for the next sign of withdrawal. It is in this space that the choice becomes unavoidable. Distance has fully replaced intimacy, and you must decide whether to keep living inside that void or to reclaim the fullness of love you deserve. The breaking point, painful as it is, can be a gift. It forces you to see that you cannot nurture intimacy with someone who confuses closeness with suffocation. It reminds you that love is not meant to be a guessing game, that a true partner does not run from connection but leans into it. The distance is no longer romantic, no longer alluring. It has become the end of what could have been, and in that realization lies the beginning of your freedom. The first choice in an avoidant relationship is often the one that seems easiest at first glance, but costs the most in the end. Staying and shrinking yourself, settling for crumbs of connection, it begins subtly, almost invisibly. You convince yourself that what you're receiving is enough, that a text every few days or an occasional sign of affection is evidence of care. You downplay the silence, rationalize the distance, and tell yourself that their absence is not rejection, but simply the way they are. Over time, you learn to lower your expectations, adjusting them downwards so that you can still call what you have a relationship. You normalize the imbalance until even scraps feel like a feast. When you choose to stay and shrink yourself, you begin molding your needs into something smaller, something less demanding, something more palatable for someone who fears closeness. You stop asking for deeper conversations because you know they will retreat. You avoid expressing your disappointment because you fear it will push them away. You train yourself to swallow the words you desperately want to say, to hide the longing you feel, and to pretend that the distance doesn't hurt. The tragedy of this choice is that, little by little, You begin disappearing inside the very relationship you are trying so hard to preserve. This shrinking is not a conscious decision you make all at once. It happens in increments. At first, it feels like compromise, the kind that relationships are supposed to require. But compromise becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice becomes self-erasure. You start believing that your needs are too much, that your desire for connection is a flaw. You learn to find joy in their rare moments of attention, like a desert traveler grateful for a single drop of rain. Yet, no matter how many times you tell yourself it is enough, the emptiness keeps growing because love was never meant to be rationed in fragments. Staying in this position also breeds a quiet kind of exhaustion. You find yourself working endlessly to decode their moods, to anticipate their needs, to create a safe environment where they might, just maybe, let their guard down. You become both caretaker and hostage, investing more and more energy while receiving less and less in return. The imbalance begins to weigh on you in ways you don't even realize. Your confidence dwindles, your sense of worth becomes tied to their approval, and your world starts revolving around someone who cannot or will not meet you halfway. The deeper you sink into this choice, the harder it becomes to leave. You convince yourself that the crumbs you're given are signs of progress, that the rare spark of closeness means change is possible. Hope becomes the glue that keeps you stuck. Hope that someday they will see your loyalty, recognize your patience, and reward your sacrifice with the intimacy you crave. But hope without evidence is a dangerous fuel. It burns brightly but leaves you empty, keeping you tethered to a promise that never arrives. To stay and shrink yourself is to live in a state of quiet hunger, always reaching for something just out of grasp. It may preserve the relationship in form, but it robs it of spirit. More than that, it robs you of yourself. For every day you settle for crumbs, you teach yourself that you do not deserve a full meal, that your needs are negotiable, that your voice must stay silent to keep someone else comfortable. And in the end, the cost of staying is not just the loss of intimacy with another, it is the loss of intimacy with yourself. ChatGPT said, when you choose to stay in a relationship where avoidance dictates the rhythm, you slowly begin to lose touch with the very essence of who you are. At first, it feels like you're simply being patient, showing compassion, and giving space in hopes that love will eventually find a way to grow. But what seems like understanding quickly transforms into a quiet compromise that chips away at your dignity. You start making excuses for the silences, justifying the lack of affection, and convincing yourself that asking for more might be unreasonable. What you don't realize is that with each moment you downplay your own needs, a little piece of your self-respect slips away. Dignity thrives when you know your worth and refuse to accept less than mutual love. In an avoidant relationship, dignity dies not with a dramatic betrayal, but with 1,000 small concessions that convince you to settle for less than you deserve. Joy follows shortly after. Love, at its best, is supposed to bring lightness, energy, and comfort. It is meant to add color to your days, not drain them of vibrancy. Yet when you are entangled with someone who withdraws each time closeness feels threatening, joy becomes conditional. You find yourself waiting for the rare moments of connection, the brief text, the fleeting smile, the occasional soft word, and you cling to those moments as though they are proof of love. But true joy cannot survive on scarcity. Instead of feeling free and uplifted, you live in constant anticipation, wondering when they will pull away again. The laughter you once shared fades into silence, and the happiness you felt in the beginning gets replaced by anxiety and uncertainty. What once felt like a promise of a future becomes a slow unraveling of your present. Joy cannot flourish in the shadow of avoidance. It wilts under the pressure of inconsistency. And perhaps the most dangerous erosion is of your self-worth. When your partner's distance becomes the norm, you start internalizing the belief that you are the problem. You tell yourself that if you were more attractive, more patient, more accommodating, then maybe they would finally let down their guard and love you openly. Over time, this self-blame carves deep cracks into the way you see yourself. What once was confidence transforms into doubt. What once was certainty in your value becomes a quiet fear that maybe you're not enough. And the longer you stay, the more this distorted belief roots itself into your identity. Instead of recognizing that avoidance is their pattern, you mistakenly carry the weight of fixing something that was never within your control. Self-worth cannot survive when it is constantly bartered for scraps of validation. This path is dangerous because it disguises itself as love. You convince yourself you're holding on because you care, because you see their potential, because you believe in what could be. But in truth, you are losing yourself piece by piece. You stop asking for what you need. You stop believing you deserve better. You stop feeling the joy that love is meant to provide. And though you may not see it immediately, the cost becomes clear when you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back at you. A relationship that forces you to abandon your dignity, sacrifice your joy, and doubt your worth is not love. It is a slow undoing of everything that makes you whole. The second choice is to walk away and reclaim your voice. And though it sounds simple when spoken, it is anything but easy in practice. Walking away is not merely the act of leaving a relationship. It is the deeper act of leaving behind the version of yourself that tolerated being unseen and unheard. It is the decision to no longer measure your worth against someone else's capacity to show up. For so long, you may have tried to fit into their world, soften your needs, or silence your instincts just to preserve the fragile connection, but walking away is the opposite of that. It is the moment you decide that your needs are valid, that your love is worthy, and that your heart deserves a safe place to land. Reclaiming your voice means rediscovering the strength you lost in all those moments when you told yourself to stay quiet, to be patient, to wait for change that never arrived. This choice begins in silence, not theirs, but yours. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of clarity, the space where you begin to hear yourself again. For months or even years, you may have been so focused on listening for the faint signals of affection from them that you stopped listening to your own heart. But when you reclaim your voice, the first thing you hear is your truth that love is not supposed to be this painful, that connection is not meant to be this one-sided. From that truth, a new power grows. It is a power that doesn't beg, doesn't plead, and doesn't lower itself to win someone's approval. It is a power that calmly steps away because it recognizes that being alone is less lonely than being ignored in the presence of someone you love. Walking away is also a test of faith, not in the other person, but in yourself. It requires faith that you will not only survive the loss, but also thrive beyond it. The fear of leaving often whispers that you will regret it, that no one else will love you the way this person does, even if their love is inconsistent. But the truth is, you will regret more deeply the moments you allowed yourself to remain small just to keep someone else comfortable. The regret of staying past the expiration of your dignity is far heavier than the grief of letting go. To reclaim your voice, you must believe that your future holds more than the fragments of affection you've been trying to piece together. You must believe that real intimacy, one that feels safe and mutual, is possible and that you deserve to experience it fully. And perhaps most importantly, reclaiming your voice is not only about what you walk away from, but also about what you walk toward. You walk toward the version of yourself that you abandoned along the way, the one who once knew how to dream freely, to laugh without fear, to speak without worrying about pushing someone away. You walk toward relationships where your needs are not a burden, but a bridge to deeper understanding. You walk toward a life where love feels expansive instead of restrictive, where your voice is not silenced but celebrated. In choosing this path, you declare that you will no longer be defined by the fear of losing someone who was never fully there. You declare that you would rather stand in your own light, even if it means standing alone for a while, than remain in the shadows of someone else's avoidance. Walking away and reclaiming your voice is the second choice, and it is the harder one at first. But over time, it is the only choice that leads to peace, growth, and the kind of love that does not ask you to disappear in order to stay. It is not just the end of a relationship, it is the beginning of freedom, the return of your own strength, and the unshakable reminder that you are worthy of a love that shows up without fear. Letting go is not punishment, it is an act of self-respect and a demand for reciprocity. Too often, people confuse walking away with cruelty, as if leaving means you are trying to hurt the other person or prove a point. In reality, letting go is one of the most compassionate choices you can make, not only for yourself, but also for the person you've been holding on to. It is a declaration that love should not be sustained by one-sided effort, that your value is not measured by how long you can endure neglect, and that your heart deserves the same care and attention it gives so freely. To let go is to recognize that staying in a relationship where your needs are dismissed or minimized only trains you to believe you are asking for too much, when in truth you are simply asking for the basics of love. When you demand reciprocity, you are not demanding perfection. You are not asking for someone to never falter or to meet every expectation you have without fail. You are asking for the kind of mutual effort that makes love sustainable. Relationships are not meant to be a solo performance where one person carries the weight of communication, reassurance, and compromise while the other stays guarded behind walls of avoidance. By letting go, you are refusing to participate in that imbalance any longer. You are saying, "But I am willing to give, but only if you are willing to meet me halfway." That is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the line that protects you from the slow erosion of your spirit. Self-respect means refusing to play small so that someone else can feel comfortable in their fear of intimacy. It means refusing to silence your needs because you are afraid of scaring someone away. When you respect yourself, you stop negotiating against your own worth. You stop pretending that inconsistency is love or that unpredictability is passion. Instead, you embrace the quiet but powerful truth that you are enough exactly as you are, and anyone who cannot recognize that is not ready for the kind of relationship you are offering. Letting go is the moment you step back from chasing validation and instead stand firmly in the knowledge that your love is not something to be begged for. It is something to be matched. It is natural to feel grief when you walk away. You may miss the person, the memories, and even the hope of what could have been if they had chosen differently. But grief is not proof that you made the wrong decision. It is simply the cost of honoring yourself. Growth often comes wrapped in sadness because you are leaving behind what is familiar, even if that familiarity was built on disappointment. With time, the grief fades, and in its place comes strength, clarity, and peace. You realize that letting go did not diminish your capacity to love. It expanded your understanding of what love should truly feel like. Reciprocity is not a luxury, it is the foundation of a healthy relationship. When you let go of someone who cannot or will not give back what you are offering, you create space for someone who can. You open the door to a connection where vulnerability is met with openness, effort is met with effort, and love is met with love. Letting go is not a punishment for the other person's inability to show up. It is a gift to yourself. It is the brave decision to stop pouring into a well that never fills and instead redirect your energy toward a future where you no longer have to carry love alone. The real ending depends on you. Lose yourself in waiting or find yourself in the courage to leave. That single truth stands at the heart of every relationship with someone who keeps you at arm's length, someone who loves from a distance but never fully arrives. It is tempting to stay in that waiting room of possibility, convincing yourself that time, patience, and unconditional loyalty will eventually soften their walls. You replay moments when they showed glimpses of closeness, you hold on to small gestures as proof that change is coming, and you tell yourself that if you can endure just a little longer, they will finally see your worth. But waiting is not passive, it is active self-abandonment. A slow erosion of your own needs in the hope of being chosen. Every day you wait for them to change, you are quietly choosing to lose yourself. Losing yourself in waiting is not always obvious at first. It begins with small compromises, the unanswered calls you excuse, the conversations you avoid so you don't overwhelm them, the needs you tuck away because you fear they'll run if you ask too much. Over time, these compromises become your normal. You start believing that the depth of your love will compensate for the depth of their fear. You convince yourself that love is meant to be endured, that sacrifice is noble, that patience is proof of loyalty. And while all of that may sound virtuous, what you are really doing is starving yourself of the very intimacy you deserve. You are building a relationship on hope, not reality, and hope alone is a fragile foundation. There comes a point, though, when the cost of waiting becomes undeniable. You notice the loneliness that lingers even when you're together. You feel the ache of conversations that never go beneath the surface. You recognize that your dreams, Your voice, your desires have been pushed into the shadows. It is in this clarity that the second choice emerges, the choice to leave, not out of bitterness, but out of courage. To leave is to declare that your worth does not depend on someone else's readiness. It is to say, I will not keep shrinking to fit inside a space that was never built to hold me. Leaving is not abandonment, it is self-preservation, and more than that, it is self-respect. Finding yourself in the courage to leave is never easy. It feels like stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the comfort of familiarity, even if that familiarity has been painful. It requires you to trust that love should not feel like chasing, that real intimacy does not demand constant sacrifice of your own soul. But in choosing this path, you reclaim something invaluable. You reclaim yourself. You open the door to relationships where your presence is not a burden, but a gift, where your needs are not minimized, but met with eagerness, where love does not feel like waiting, but like arriving home. The real ending of every avoidant relationship depends on you, and the choice you make shapes not only your present, but the life you will live tomorrow. Lose yourself in waiting, and you prolong the achy. Find yourself in the courage to leave, and you step into a love that will finally match the depth of your heart.